Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Leadership Bite number 2, designed for the St Leonard's leadership team. And today we're going to be talking about radical candor. And it is spelt right, candor. I'm using the American spelling because I'm going to be mainly looking at this book by a lady called Kim Scott today. Let me start with an acknowledgement of country and acknowledging the Boonwurrung people, who are the traditional custodians of the land here in Bayside, where St Leonard's is located, and pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So just a reminder about our pedagogical values, where we always start from. And today we're really going to be focused on this value, the authentic, caring relationships. And I know we talk a lot about that in terms of our students. So we're talking a lot about developing those relationships with students, etc. But today is very much going to be about how we can develop these authentic, caring relationships across the organization, and that in particular with the staff in our own faculties or our own departments. And we're going to use this system that Kim Scott developed called Radical Candor. So who was Kim Scott? Well, she is somebody from Silicon Valley, very much involved in industry. So the book, which I would recommend you read, has got that real industry focus rather than necessarily an education focus. But that's not such a bad thing. I find it's great to pull from different sorts of industries, like, as you've seen, Twitter, Dropbox, Google, YouTube. And prior to that, she was working as a pediatric clinic manager over in Kosovo, and working as doing diamond cutting in Moscow. So she's had this really broad and interesting experience that's certainly worth reading about if you get her book and have a read through. And this is the model that she presents to us. And it's essentially about our behavior as a leader, how we behave with our team. And she tells a number of really interesting stories, but they're focused on this idea of empathy, but not what she describes as ruinous empathy. I mean, essentially, she's trying to show us a balance between these behaviors that work best to get the best out of our teams, to build the capacity of the teachers that we're working with, and to really make sure that they're working really well and are happy at work. So these are some of the behaviors she looked at. You can see underlined on the screen is manipulative insincerity, I should say, and that idea of trying to be friends with people when you don't really know them, trying to say things that you think are the right things to say. She's pretty harsh on that. She says that's quite insincere, and it's about actually getting to know our staff so that when we connect with the other people we're working with, those connections are genuine. And it's just like we've said in our values here at the college, authentic, caring relationships. And that authenticity, we know students can see right through it when we're not being authentic. And so that authenticity needs to also exist within our teams in faculties as well. So she talks quite a lot about that. She obviously discusses obnoxious aggression, and I don't think we see much of that in our organization. And I think generally as teachers, there isn't a lot of aggression, but it's something just to monitor, because sometimes there is this feeling of, oh, we've got to be tough and we've got to just tell them what we think. And I think sometimes that can come across as being a bit aggressive. So that's just one thing to be aware of going forward as well. The area that I think that maybe as teachers we do get sucked into a bit is the ruinous empathy. And we feel it a bit as well, just with our own students. Sometimes we perhaps show them a bit too much empathy, maybe give them a little bit too much rope, so to speak, when it comes to tasks, because we understand perhaps some of the things they're going through at home. But it's similar as well with our teams. And because schools essentially end up feeling like lovely big families, which is a really nice thing to have. They're communities. They're places where people can be for many, many years, and where people can be really, really caring of each other and live their lives inside. The tendency can be to be pulled towards so much empathy that we don't end up having high expectations, or we don't end up expecting things to get done. So she talks a lot about ruinous empathy, and it's interesting because she's coming from this industry background, she probably focuses a lot more on that obnoxious aggression. But I think from a school background, that monitoring just how empathetic we are being is an important one for us as instructional leaders in schools. So on her axis, I should say, of what she calls radical candor, she says that sits between that y-axis of caring personally and the x-axis of challenging directly. And what she means by that is that we care for our team on a human level. And I think this is a message that isn't new to schools. We care about our students on a human level. We don't just care about them as learners, that they're going to get good results in their exam and see you later. We know that with students, it's about caring for the whole child. And I think every teacher knows that, whatever school that they're in. But it's very similar with our colleagues. This idea that we should be caring personally about all the people we're working with, that we should see them as human beings, that we should understand when they're going through a tough time at home or whatever they might be doing. So I think that axis of caring personally is really important, but also the balance with challenging their work directly. So being able to, yes, we care about them as human beings, but also being able to say to them quite directly, this aspect of your work is an area that you need to work on, an area that you need to improve. So placing what she calls radical candor, where we're really honest about the areas that they need to improve, but we're also really honest about our love for our colleagues and our friendship and the way we care for them as human beings. Making sure that we're doing both of those things creates this space in the middle that she describes as radical candor. And it's a nice model to use, I would say, for leadership going forward. So how do you care personally? Well, it's things like the taking a personal interest, the empathy in regards to their wider life, seeing them as human beings and not cogs in a machine, which I think, you can see why she would be saying that working in Silicon Valley, and showing that you care about them on a human level. And that empathy, she tells a story about a CEO who comes in to his team and in a meeting talks about a holiday he's having to the Bahamas, and what a great holiday it's going to be and how tired he is and how he can't wait. And when one of his team says to him, "Oh, that sounds like a lovely holiday," he makes a quip about, "Oh yeah, it'd be great to see you there sometime. Oh, you'd love the bar, you'd love this," having absolutely no empathy for the fact that this is a single mum in America on an income probably, an eighth, maybe even a tenth of what he is on, who would have absolutely no possibility of being able to go on a holiday to the Bahamas. And so that lack of understanding of his team on a human level had a really big impact. So he wasn't trying to be nasty, but it wasn't the right sort of care. So she talks a lot about that. But then she also talks about the challenging directly, making sure that people are aware of the areas of work where they need to improve. And I've talked in the past about having a strengths-based approach. So rather than going to somebody and saying, "You're bad at this, you're bad at that," that's not going to help relationships particularly well. But if you have a strengths-based approach where they can come to that understanding of the areas that they need to improve, that can now also work within this system of radical candor, where you can challenge them. You know that this is an area you're marking as an area. You've told me that this is an area that you'd like to improve. So why is it when I check your books after 4 weeks, I still can't see anything in them, any evidence of assessment? Why is this particular parent complaining? Those challenges are important. And her contention is that we can use that empathetic relationship as the basis of your interactions when you are challenging those particular staff members about areas that they might need to develop. So as she says, when you challenge them, it's not that you're challenging them personally about their humanness or about who they are as people. You're challenging them about their work, that sort of idea of work is separated from them as a person. It's an interesting contention. Not sure it can work every single time, but it's a good one to read and to be aware of. So let me show you a little example of how it might work in practice Here's a scenario. You've got a great teacher. The lessons seem engaging, interesting, even inspirational, connecting things to the real world, doing everything we'd want to see when we walk into a lesson. But then you get 2 complaints from one of their classes, let's say they're year 9 parents, that work hasn't been marked for ages. You go and have a quiet word to a few of their students and they say, oh no, we never get marks. And then they just seem to be made up, not really connected to any of the work that we've done. So, you've got alarm bells going as a head of learning. You're thinking, what am I going to do about this? On the one hand, everything seems great. The lessons seem awesome. Everything's going well. But on the other hand, the marking isn't being done. The assessment's not being done. Maybe the reports are a bit late. Some of those sorts of issues. And I know that this is an issue that many of us face going forward. So think about it. If that literally happened to you today, what would you do? How would you approach that necessary conversation coming up? What Kim Scott would say about this particular conversation is she'd advise you to start by acknowledging the personal relationship that you've already established with this person. So maybe you've worked together for many years, or maybe thinking about a couple of you that you're brand new to the college as heads of learning. So maybe it's been great getting to know you over the last year if it's a new relationship. And if you know something about them, so maybe something's happened, acknowledge that. I know it's been difficult recently because your child is sick, or you're having some marital difficulties, or whatever that might be. So that's why it's so important to care personally at the beginning, because you actually find these things out and you start to realize, where is this sitting within their lives? Marking might be the last thing they're worried about right now. So we have to acknowledge that at the beginning of this difficult conversation, that personal relationship. Then what Kim Scott might argue is then take a strengths-based approach. Talk about what they're good at, acknowledge them personally as a human being, then tell them what they're good at this job. And all the teachers at St. Leonard's are good at something. So it's about focusing on the positives, putting them in a space where they're feeling safe, where they're not feeling attacked or questioned on a personal level, so that if you put them in that space, they're then ready to listen to the challenge. They're ready to listen to that constructive criticism that you're going to give them in a moment. So whether that's great inspirational material in this case, or you're motivating the students, or you're inspiring the students, tell them. Make sure you tell them. You might think, oh, well, they know that already, but actually it's lovely to hear. So tell them. Then we get to the challenge directly. This is the point where you've acknowledged them on a human level. You've told them what a great job they're doing in certain aspects, but there is a problem. Recently, I've received these complaints. So again, it's not a personal problem. It's a factual problem. I've got a complaint from a parent, or a student has told me this. Much easier to deal with it on this, I would say, factual level, rather than escalating it to some sort of big philosophical topic, which becomes really difficult to argue because it sets up perhaps big opposing viewpoints. It's much more about, I'll challenge you directly initially by clarifying these facts. When I receive this complaint from the parent, and you don't know how they might respond to this, because the next step, of course, is to listen to them. They might completely deny it. They might refuse to accept it. And in that case, I would be saying to them, well, okay, fine, I believe you. So why do we receive this feedback? Why has a parent said this? So it's about asking those questions, not about forcing them to accept this criticism, much more about genuinely showing them you want to find out what's going on. Because perhaps the criticisms are unfair. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps there's been a history of criticism from a particular parent that needs somebody, maybe a head of learning or even a head of school, to step in and try and mediate and sort something out. So it's very important that you listen to their responses once they have been challenged. Challenging isn't the end part of the discussion. Challenging is the beginning, when you're actually trying to get them to start thinking and responding, and you're trying to work out this problem together, rather than this is what you've done wrong, so sort it out. It's much more, these are the facts that have come to my attention that I need to address with you now, and listen genuinely to their response. They could accept it and then give you a personal reason why. And the ruinous empathy, that little bit of the radical candor would be when you just simply accept that personal reason, say, oh, okay, that's what's happening at home. So yes, there's no marking at the moment. Fine, end of conversation. Well, of course, that's wrong. We have to provide support to ensure that the work part of their life is still satisfactory, that the marking does get done, even though they might be going through something quite difficult. So you validate their reason. You say, of course, I understand why it must be hard to do your marking if one of your family members has been really ill. That must be really tough. You can't do any work at home at the moment. How can we provide some support? Is there a time during the week where we can make sure you don't get an extra, where you can just mark at school? All of those really practical problem-solving sorts of things, but first validating that personal relationship if it is something personal that they raise as one of the problems. They could just accept it and promise to do better, which is great. And I've had quite a few teachers do that with me in the past. Oh yeah, you're right. I didn't get around to that. I should have. Sorry, I'll get onto it. I think sometimes that is a good way of staff getting ahead of learning off their back. And I think we need to be just a little bit careful to ensure that we then put that monitoring process in place. So if they completely accept it, say they're going to do something about it, you need to check back in 2 weeks. You need to check back in 4 weeks, because otherwise I can tell you in 6 weeks, you'll get another email from the parent and it'll look like you've done nothing about it. And you'll think to yourself, oh God, I did that whole meeting. I went through that whole process and they accepted it. So to me, it's a big win. I got it. There was a win. They understood it and they said they'd get better. But unless you check that they actually have gotten better, then it could all blow up in your face again down the track. So I would say, how can we monitor this improvement? And I'd ask them that. Fine. So how can we monitor this? Can you show me your books in 2 weeks' time once they're all marked? I'd like to see that. So I think that's a good little tactic going forward. So the other big thing as part of this is just before you go into this meeting, a problem's been raised, you as the head of learning has to consider about how to solve this problem. I've given you some tips about perhaps what you could say and when you could say it through the meeting, but it's really important to have a clear aim in your mind about what you want to get from this meeting. And that doesn't mean I want an outcome, but it does mean I want to make sure that I get through certain aspects of the process, I would say. Because if you have a really clear aim of an outcome, then you're perhaps not listening to them quite enough. But the process is what's important. So for me, the aims would be, number one, make sure that the person you're meeting feels safe and valued. And that's because no one's going to want to improve if they're feeling attacked or devalued. If they're told, you're bad at this, immediately the meeting is off on the wrong foot and they're not going to want to improve. Number two is get them to acknowledge the area they need to improve. So that acknowledgement is really important. But, and this is the big but on this, if they do need to improve, listen to them first. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe the parents are wrong. So you've got to stay open-minded. So that's what I mean for the aims of the meeting. It's not no matter what, they're going to know that they've done the wrong thing here. You've got to be open-minded to think, well, maybe they haven't. So I need to clarify that point. But then when it becomes clear during the meeting that perhaps there is something they need to improve, get them to acknowledge it. Number three, come up with a nice plan or strategy as to how they're going to improve. And more importantly, what support you're going to provide for them to improve. Telling them to improve isn't support. We've got to then map out a plan of, okay, so this is the area of weakness, this is the area that you need to work on. So you can go to this professional learning, or let's meet once a week for the next 4 weeks to make sure that I've gone through your planning and I can help you on a basis, or I can set you up with this mentor who can do the same sort of thing. So really come up with something very concrete about the support you're going to provide. And that even is for those who say, oh yeah, you're right, I didn't do my marking, sorry, I didn't get around to it, I'll get onto it now. Even those people who completely accept and acknowledge what they've done, they still need an aspect of support, even if it's just to monitor their progress towards success. And that's number 4, this monitoring of progress, confirming their improvement. So that is really ticking something off rather than I've had the meeting, so that's the end of it. It's not. The meeting is almost the start of that improvement process. You must monitor how they then progress so that at the end of this progress, you can say, right, they're now up to an area, up to a standard, if you like, where I'm comfortable, where we won't receive any complaints, where the students are happy and learning, they're back up to that area. And now I can almost take a step back and look elsewhere. So really think about how you're going to monitor their progress and how you're going to communicate to the other stakeholders about that. Because, you know, you don't want to hang out teachers to dry with parents and say, oh, yes, you're absolutely right. I've sorted them out. He's going to do what he's told now. You know, they're not the sort of conversations we have with parents. But on the other hand, parents and other stakeholders will need to be informed about progress. So this is an area where you're very welcome to come and take advice, because it's a tricky one about how much you tell them about a particular process that you're going through with a staff member, but they need to feel that you have acknowledged their concerns if they brought them to you as well, that you've looked into it, that you've listened, and that, you know, very much their feelings are being acknowledged. So tough one, that one, but just keep that in your mind. And that's also something you can ask that teacher. So an aim for this meeting could be to say, okay, thank you for that. That's great. We've got a clear plan about what you're going to do about marking. How would you like me to communicate now back to these 2 sets or 3 sets of parents that complained? Would you like me to send them an email? Would you like to send an email? Because sometimes it's more empowering if the teacher sends an email to those parents saying, thanks for communicating with my head of learning. Absolutely accept. I'm really sorry I got behind with your son's class's marking, but it's all been marked now and your son is progressing, ... and a nice little blurb about that particular student. You know, that could be a strategy. So the teacher might want to take that on themselves, or they might not feel confident enough as well. So discuss that with them. Discuss the idea of what the communication is going to look like with the other stakeholders. The supported professional reflection practice is obviously what you would normally do with all your staff members anyway. This isn't in response to a problem. Meeting 1, meeting 2, and meeting 3 all would sit within the year, just so that your staff members are feeling listened to, so that they are part of a program where they're feeling as though they can reflect, and you're listening to that reflection, providing some advice, using a strengths-based approach to take the next steps in their career. A meeting in response to a specific issue is more where I would be thinking radical candor. Now, obviously through meeting 1, meeting 2, and meeting 3 in this process, you're establishing that care personally axis. You're showing them that you care about them. And maybe through a challenge, you're saying to them, well, what do you want to do next? That's your challenge. What do you want to do next with your career? What are you going to do now? And maybe that's the area where you can push them a little bit whilst showing them that you care about their needs and their wants and their career. But it might be that if a specific issue has been brought up, that doesn't fit into this process necessarily. That's something a little bit like that performance management arrow that sits outside the process, where you're going to deal with that particular issue separately to your meetings in regards to their progress, their career, etc. So think about how you might delineate your normal capacity building management of your people in your department with your reactive meetings to specific issues. And it's good to make that clear to the staff member you're meeting, to say, this is a meeting about just this issue. We can have another meeting about your general career and progress going forward. I'd really like to hear some of your thoughts and empower them to do one of those meetings in meeting 2 or meeting 3. Great. Thanks. I've tried to keep it pretty snappy. Hopefully this resource is useful going forward. And of course, as always, do feel very, very free to come and chat with me about this going forward. Thanks a lot.